really appreciative that you've given me a cap of time, and please hold me to that. And I really, really appreciate any questions or discussion that you want to launch into. Kind of like my bio said, there is no question that's off limits. And, if we can have honest dialogue about what's happening in our community, that's how we make real change happen. So I'm not too sure how familiar most of you are with our agency, but we are a 27-bed shelter, but we always run closer to 35. So we're pulling out cots, and we're, doing what we can to provide service to as many women as possible and their children. And we have to refer out over 500 women every year to other shelters. So we reach out to our other shelters in Simcoe County because they are smaller and population is not as big as ours in Barrie. And so we refer out to those other shelters to help us with our overflow. We primarily serve Barrie, Innisfil, and Angus, and Borden. And so we do see really, a lot of women and their kids come through. They really do just show up at our door. They've left everything behind, and usually they're coming with nothing because they don't have time to pack up and, bring all their items in. And of course, we wouldn't have room for that anyway. So, of course, in my time, almost 6 years at the shelter, all we've seen is a steady increase in the amount of women and children using our services. And I would be amiss if I did not mention the impacts of COVID, as I know COVID has impacted every single person in our community, including myself. And we have seen a really difficult time for women and their kids who are being abused at home and then needing to isolate during COVID. So as all of us, we've had to pivot. That's the word of the day, I think. Pivot, change how we offer our services. And our shelter, of course, is an essential service. We were never able to close throughout COVID. So, it's been a very challenging time, but I'm very, very respectful that it's been a challenging time for all of us in the community, business people, families, and hopefully we're going to see the end to this very, very soon. So one thing that is, I think, always important for our community to know is that one of the ways we do our work is to reduce barriers for women and their children to come into our shelter. We believe that we can have the most impact, create the most help if we are able to bring women and kids into the shelter. So we have a 24-hour crisis line that is always hopping, but we will get phone calls from women who are actively involved in human trafficking, women who have significant mental health needs, and women who are in the throes of addiction. We do not deny service to women and their children because of any of those factors. So again, we really endeavor to bring them in as much as possible, because that's the only way that we can provide help and hopefully start to create a better life with them and for them. And so it does present a lot of challenges. And I think as every community knows, the increase of opioid-related deaths is significant. And our shelter has not been immune to that. So like many shelters, we have women that come in, they are heavily addicted. And unfortunately, we've had deaths occur for various reasons and a lot of overdose. And that is not uncommon in the shelter system, the same way it's not uncommon just in our communities. But we always want our community to know that we work hard to reduce those barriers so that we can bring in as many women as possible. In terms of who uses our shelter, it's anyone and everyone. So we have business women, we've had women who are married to police officers, lawyers. There really is no difference in the life circumstance of women who will come into our shelter. And I like to share that because I think we may have a vision in our mind about the women who actually use our services. And we have our emergency shelter, but we also have a wide range of community supports, counseling supports as well. We see all nature of women who come into us. And I think that folks are sometimes surprised about that because we would assume that a businesswoman, a politician, a lawyer, that she may have resources to not come into our shelter, but that's not always the case because when they are picking up and leaving everything behind, she's coming into our shelter at that point with nothing and she's homeless. So it's just always good to put that into perspective about who uses our services. We're definitely seeing an increase in the amount of immigrant, refugee, and migrant women. Typically, a woman and her kids would stay in our shelter upwards of 3 months. Now, 10 years ago, that would have been about 6 weeks. That is one of the differences that we're seeing in terms of how our services have had to change. We have an immigrant woman who is in our shelter now, and she's been there over 2 years. And the reason for that is because the legal system to support those women is very tricky to navigate. And sometimes those women, by nature of their abuse, they no longer have identification and they don't have status. So they can't apply for Ontario Works, which means they can't apply for affordable housing. It is a vicious cycle of red tape and bureaucracy to try and help those women. And so those women, when they come into our shelter, if we get caught up in this pattern of not really being able to help them, they have nowhere to go. We're hopeful that maybe some changes will come to the systems around them to make that better, because it's never good for a woman and her children to stay in our shelter that long. It becomes much harder for them to move on and become independent when they are with us for such a long time. It's almost kind of like they become permanent residents, which is never the case. And that's not the purpose of our shelter. Our purpose is emergency safety for women who are at risk of being killed and abused. And we try to move them on as quickly as possible. And then once they leave our shelter, our community supports kick in, and that's counseling, housing support, legal support. And we have women who remain in those services for 10 years and over. Because what we know is just the cycle of abuse, the triggers, the trauma that they've experienced is deep rooted. And it takes a very, very long time for them to try and move through that. And there's a lot of fear. And even when a woman leaves her abusive partner, that doesn't mean that the abuse doesn't stop. It just changes in a different way. We see that, for example, in the court system. So a woman who might be going to court, family court with her abuser, he may decide to self-represent. And what that means is that it completely slows down the court process. And it's just another way to kind of manipulate her in a different fashion. And we see a lot of abuse that happens over social media, sharing of photos, posts on social media, things like that. And so it's a very, very complex issue that we're continuing to have to support our women with, even long after they've left the shelter. We do have a very robust children's program. We have a lot of kids that come in with their mothers, and the kids are just as or more so traumatized than their mothers are. So we put in a lot of supports for our kids. We have art therapy, equine therapy, sand therapy, music therapy, talk therapy. And so we try to really help those kids to understand what a healthy relationship should look like. And, those kids, they come in, they're angry, they're hurt. And then they've also maybe learned ways to relate to other people that is not the best way. And so we really try to help those kids to monitor and control their own behavior and their emotions. And so that takes a considerable amount of work. It is not uncommon for us to have a woman come into our shelter with her children, and then 15 years later, we may see that child, a young girl who's now a young adult woman coming into our shelter for the exact same reason that her mother did. And that is the cycle of abuse that we're always trying to, you know, put a stop to. And for the most part, we are successful, but we do see that cycle of violence continue, which is very, very challenging. Um, in terms of, the other programs that we have a violence prevention program where we will go into the schools and we talk with youth about healthy relationships. What does consent mean? We really want to try and get in early to have those conversations. We firmly believe in prevention. The problem is that we only can apply for grants to be able to do that. So we've had a violence prevention program for the last 2 years, and that grant is coming to an end in January. We've had great success, but like so many nonprofits, you're at the mercy of very limited ministry funding, and you're at the mercy of grants that end. We are always trying to be really creative to try and find more funds to be able to do what it is that we need to do. And, again, that word pivot, when those grants come to an end, we just try and find other ways to do things. So we do have a very successful violence prevention program. And we also have a women's advocacy council, which is also from a grant, and that's going to be ending next year in June as well. And that has been a very eclectic group of women in the community who want to use their voice to speak out against policies, legislation that has an impact on women and children, relationships, family life. And so they will write letters to our government officials, they will attend rallies. That's been incredibly successful as well. And that group is made up of business women, politicians, very active women in the community, and women with lived experience, because we believe in having women that have used our services, women with any kind of lived experience of violence, to talk about what their experience has meant to them, and to also guide services and tell us what it is that they need from us. So that's a very eclectic group that we're very proud of, and unfortunately it will come to an end next year. One of the other things that we do, which might be something that I would also like to offer to your group and to the Innisfil community, we do a lot of training throughout the community. We go to local businesses. It's primarily myself that does that, to talk about, well, primarily trauma-informed supports. We do that training for businesses, municipal workers who are interacting with the community. Because what we know is that they're interacting with folks in the community who have addictions, who have mental health, and it can be very, very challenging for them when someone comes into your store and they may need help, or they're coming in and they're intoxicated. Like, how do you maneuver through supporting them? So we provide training to businesses and municipal workers, anyone really who interacts with the community, just to build their strategies in their toolbox about how do you look at that person from a trauma-informed lens, recognizing that that person has trauma, and how do you de-escalate situations, and how do you work with them, how do you maintain your own safety. And so I've been part of the Bright Spot training, which is happening in Barrie, and the downtown BIA enlists us to train businesses that want to become Bright Spot ambassadors. And what that means is that they've had the training about how to work with folks in the community, de-escalate those situations. And once they've taken that training, they actually get a sign that they put in their window that says, "I'm a Bright Spot." What that also means is if there's someone who needs help in the community, and for us, of course, it's primarily a woman who might be at risk or need help, when she sees that sign or when anybody needs that sign, they know that they can go in and they can ask for help. And that may just mean, can you call the police for me? Can you call an ambulance? It may just mean, can I stay here while I wait for a taxi? Any of those things, right? But we want to equip the business community, municipal workers to know how to handle those situations. And so I would, just like to extend that to the Innisfil community, that if you ever wanted any of those trainings, I'd be so happy to engage and provide that for you. I mean, there's no cost or anything like that. It's just something that we feel if our community has more things in their toolbox to be able to work with vulnerable people in the community, that helps all of us. And so we've had great success with that program. And that's just one realm of training that we offer to the community. Trauma-informed supports. Of course, we talk about training about understanding abuse and signs to look for. The other piece I think I just want to land on, and then maybe we can open it up for questions, is the element of human trafficking. So we have always supported trafficked victims in our shelter, and we have only seen an incredible increase. And our Innisfil Barrie is considered a corridor for the movement and transportation of primarily women who are being trafficked for sexual exploitation. There is a huge amount of millions of dollars that is earned by traffickers in that sexual exploitation of women. And what we're seeing, the earliest ages, well, they can be very, very young, but typically around 10 or 11 years old is the age that the grooming can start for that human trafficking piece. Because there was such a need in our community to be able to quickly bring women in who are being trafficked, we pulled out 2 of our beds, and we have 2 dedicated beds just for trafficked victims. We always have way more than 2 in our shelter. So we have those 2 beds, but we always have overflow. And we wanted to make sure that we had those beds available, and they're always full though, because we'll get a phone call from Barrie Police, South Simcoe Police, to say, we have a couple of women in a hotel, and do you have space? Can we bring them in? And so that was the urgent need that we felt that we needed to respond to. We are also part of a provincial human trafficking hotline, which means we get calls from women in Alberta, women in BC, women from the East Coast who, or the police services in those areas that will call us and say, we need space for a woman. Can we bring her over to you? And we work with them, whatever agency might be supporting them or the police, to get those women to us. Part of the reason that women may come from across Canada is that there's a real element of organized crime for women who are being trafficked. And they can be very, very bad people, and they have no worries about killing people. There's a lot of drug involvement. And so when a woman courageously steps forward to reach out to police and wants to proceed with charges, she's at extreme risk of being murdered. And so if she's going to testify in court, once she is found, if she's in a shelter in Alberta, if she's found there by her traffickers, she's at great risk, as is all the other women in that shelter and the staff. So women are moved from province to province, shelter to shelter, to try and, one, to protect her safety, and 2, to try and maintain her so that she is able to testify. So it is very, very complicated. It's very risky. And we've had many, many women who are in that spot come into our shelter, but then we have to move her to another shelter because she's been found in our shelter. And there is a real web of connectedness amongst human traffickers and organized crime folks who are involved in trafficking. It is very easy for them to find where a woman is. And once she is located and they know that she's in our shelter, we typically have to move her out to protect her and to also try and maintain her so that she can testify in court. So it is a very, no longer are the days that we are just seeing women who are abused in our shelter. It is a very complicated mishmash of abuse, what we typically would say is abuse, and then this human trafficking element, organized crime element, which always involves, human trafficking always involves drug addiction. So anyway, I could go, like I said, I could go on and talk for a very, very long time. And that is kind of really just the tip of what we do, how we do it, and who we're supporting, and the complexities of that. I'm going to stop there, and I really would love to hear your comments, your questions, anything that you would like to say to me. I'd love to hear from you. And please don't worry about any comments or questions. Always, everything is on the table just for us to have any kind of dialogue.
Okay, Teresa, I knew you guys had a big presence in the area. I didn't know the impact and to the extent that you guys served the community. So thank you for that very much. But is there any questions for Teresa? Debbie, go ahead. Sorry.
Hi, Teresa.
Hi, Debbie.
What is your funding like? What do you need from the community percentage wise?
Yeah, so we have to raise, just to keep the lights on, we have to raise $350,000 as a minimum every year. So we receive partial funding from the Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services. When we only stayed at 27 beds, we would receive about 75% of our funding from that ministry. Because we run closer to 35 now, that's more like 60%. So our fundraising, of course, our fundraising needs have had to increase to meet that need. And again, that is our basic, kind of level, right? If we wanted to do anything over and above that, then that number increases. And that doesn't include the grant money that we have to raise for like our violence prevention program and our Women's Advocacy Council. So, if I was to include that, it would definitely be over $500,000 for sure. Yeah, we do okay with our fundraising. It is, and rightly so. I mean, it is extremely hard to compete with like the hospital or Gilda's or hospice, and they do incredible work. And we all need healthcare. So I completely respect it and understand it, right? I want my hospital to have those funds too, because when I need it, I want it to be there, right? But it is hard. We're a small fish in a big pond. And so what is important to us is building relationships in the community, and that if folks want to get behind us, we just really, really appreciate that. And, folks can support us in different ways, because our grocery budget is massive, because we provide every food, every meal, every snack, every children's lunches, juice boxes. My kids are older, but I have 3 kids, and it was expensive to feed children. Why do they eat so much? I don't know, right? But so if we have, upwards of 20 children in our shelter and all ages, right? They eat a lot. They eat a lot of food. And so it helps us if someone does a food drive or a school snack drive, because that just helps us not having to take from our grocery budget and to fundraise for our grocery budget. So there's many different ways that folks can support us. And we love it when, a food drive happens, because again, it helps our bottom line. Yeah. So does that answer your question, Debbie?
It does. And I have another question. I'm in an organization, Women in Construction, and and I heard recently that you obtained a house, transitional. So
Yes.
what's all that about?
Yeah. So we were incredibly fortunate. So this is boy, I'm going to try and keep this story short. But there was a woman, an elderly woman in our community who lived in a nursing home across from our shelter. I never got the pleasure to meet her, but she knew that we were there. Anyway, she passed away and she left a considerable donation to us. And she wanted us to purchase a house so that women could leave the shelter sooner and move into that transitionary home. So in COVID last year, we purchased a house with that donation. And I never got a chance to meet that woman, but when she passed away, I had an opportunity to speak with her son who lived out in BC. This woman was horribly abused as a child. She was horribly abused in her adult marriage and really had a very sad life. So it was incredibly meaningful to us that she donated this to us. I kind of get a little bit choked up when I talk about this woman. Her name was Martha Campbell. So we purchased a house in the throes of COVID, and that house, we purchased it last year. We had to supplement, we had to kind of pull from our reserves and contribute $200,000 to it. We did a fundraising campaign, but it was worth it because since we opened that house, it has been a continual, it's always full of women leaving the shelter. The challenge we're having is that it's one house. The women who are there and with their children, they don't want to leave. So we completely see the need that for our future, we would hope that we're able to add more houses because that will really help our overflow in the shelter. But it's significant money. And of course, in this housing market, it's virtually impossible. The only way that we could do that was because we received this incredible donation from Martha Campbell. And so it's been part of my background was that I managed and I was the director of group homes, 40 group homes at one point in Barrie and Aurelia. So it wasn't unfamiliar to me to have housing locations that supported folks in the community. So it was a new thing for our shelter. I had to get my management team and my board, kind of wrapped around the idea. And now that we're there, it's an incredible success. And we just really see how beneficial it's been. And there is this little community that's happening in that house. The women are supporting each other and their children. And these are women who aren't ready to live on their own yet. They still feel like they need more support. So I have a staff person that works out of that house Monday to Friday that's there to help them, to guide them and be a resource for them. So the model has been terrific. It's just, it's unheard of for us, to receive donations like that. So, we're always trying to say to realtors and, finance planners, if you're ever meeting with someone who doesn't know where they want to leave their house or perhaps make a substantial donation, please tell them about what we've done because maybe it might be something that they want to get behind. Yeah. So thanks for asking about that, Debbie. We are so excited about that. It has been such a success and such a need that's been filled. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Debbie. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Teresa. Thanks very much for sharing with us this morning. I was listening to the part of your conversation where you talked about the whole process that you go through with the women and their children when they're getting ready to leave your shelter. I'm just curious, how do you know when a woman and her children are emotionally ready and able to leave? These are very vulnerable people, and often they go back into at least close to a community that they came from with the same challenges. Do you have follow-ups, or how long do you follow up with them, and how do you deal with that?
So we, where did I want to start with this? So a few years ago, we used to have an outreach office that was separate to our shelter, and that's our counseling, housing, legal support. And it never was a good model for me that those services were outside the shelter, because what would happen is women would leave the shelter and we would lose them. It never felt like it was this warm handoff of services to me. And I never liked it. And also I thought, why are we paying rent for a space that to me just doesn't seem to be working? So we did a campaign a couple of years ago to renovate the basement of our shelter. And we did that, and we moved all those outreach services back to the shelter. So it has been much more successful, Anne, because if a woman is upstairs in the shelter and she's getting ready to leave, we introduce her to the counseling supports right then and there, and she builds a relationship with them. It has been much more helpful to the women because they feel like they know who that counselor is going to be, who's going to be helping them. And then when she goes to leave the shelter, which is all dependent on her finding affordable housing, which is a whole nother conversation we could have. We know how difficult that is. But she already is connected to the person who will, and those outreach services can stay with that woman forever.
Okay.
And like I say, we have women who have used those services for over 10 years. And some of those women, when they have used those services for a long time, and then they're in a good place, we actually have a group, they're called our survivor group. And those are a group of women who have lived experience, who now want to volunteer for the agency. They want to use their voice to speak about the violence that they've experienced as a tool of education for the community. And so we support this group, but you have to, for a woman experiencing abuse, you have to be in a very, very good place to be able to do that. And, one of the ways that we've, really empowered them, and if you ever get an opportunity to see it, a couple of years ago, we actually, in collaboration with Rogers TV, we actually created a documentary. It's called Shelter Me. If you ever get a chance to see that, it's a half an hour documentary, and it shares the lives of women from our survivors group talking about their experiences. It's a great documentary, and I can talk so much, but to hear a woman with lived experience talk about the real piece about being abused means so much more than anything I will ever say. If you ever get a chance to see that Shelter Me documentary, please check that out on Rogers TV. And also last year, what we did, we wanted to continue the story. So we invited women with lived experience to tell their story in a different way. And we actually published a book, and that book is called Shelter Me. And so we use those as a fundraising tool as well. And, but again, it's women and children sharing their stories, their poetry, their art, talking about their experiences of violence. So again, sort of what was mentioned in my introduction was, I firmly believe in whatever the issues are in our community, we do not make change happen unless we talk about them. And how can we be creative in sharing information with our community in our realm about women who are experiencing violence? So our survivor group is very, very active. If we're doing events, we invite them to come and speak at those events. But again, you have to be very, very healthy in a good place to be able to do that. But our Shelter Me documentary and our Shelter Me book is just one of the tools that we've, really wanted to embrace to open up dialogue in our community. Yeah. So I appreciate your question, Anne, and that was a very long-winded answer, but our services really never end. And we have lots of women that come into the shelter, and you know what? They might start a new relationship, kind of, as you said, that cycle of abuse and violence. They can find themselves in another abusive relationship, right? And that's a whole nother discussion about just why that happens, but our supports really do never end. Yeah.